And today we're going to talk about something that we talk about a lot, but perhaps not from this perspective, right? Because it's a little bit easy, I think, for both you and I, because we have done this for so many years, decades even, and we sometimes forget to talk about the basics, right? So, what are we going to talk about today, Malena?
Our favorite topic, sewing with knitted fabrics.
Yay!
And if you are a total beginner, we come from have the mindset now that you know how to sew with woven, you are pretty comfortable there, but you want to try to sew your first not knitted garment, but first garment with knitted fabric, with jersey fabric. So what are the things that you need to think about? What are the things that are different from woven? So very beginner-friendly tips on how to success with knitted fabrics.
Yeah, because that's very important, and we do get questions about that, because I know a lot of you listening are perhaps already doing knit fabrics, but a lot of you are not. And as we all know, it's very different, and that's easy to forget. It's like almost like learning a new language, I think. So even if you are good or experienced with sewing with wovens, it can definitely feel like you're put back in the beginner shoes when you're gravitating towards knits. And I remember that myself a lot, and I remember also naively trying to apply a lot of woven techniques on knit fabrics, which didn't end up well, spoiler. So that's why we did doing this episode, because if you are in that position and you're like, ooh, what is this? I mean, how do I find the grain line? Why does the stitching break when I sew with a straight stitch? Or what kind of pattern should I do? Maybe what kind of pattern should I start with? All these things are things that we're going to answer in this episode. So where are we going to start, Malena, do you think? Where is like the first point?
If you are a beginner, everything starts with, well, the fabric or the pattern. And when it comes to knitted fabric, I'm going to switch in between knitted fabric and jersey all the time. Jersey is a type of knitted fabric, but single jersey is the most common fabric that you use, so that's why I'm switching in between. So just to clarify that. If you're gonna start sewing, you need a pattern or the fabric first. I mean, those are a little bit hand in hand. And when it comes to knitted fabric, it depends so much on each other. I mean, one fabric can be amazing, but with the wrong pattern, it's not going to match. And the fantastic pattern, but the wrong fabric, it's not going to match. So you have to make sure that you choose a suitable pattern for your fabric, or suitable, whichever comes first.
Absolutely.
Because here, the amazing thing with knitted fabric, is that it stretches. It has the loops, the way that it's constructed, the fabric, it stretches, it follows your body, which is nice for the movement, but it's also a little bit, could be a little bit tricky with the sewing, and depending on how much it stretch is going to be suitable or not for a specific pattern. So if you are a total beginner, I would say, first of all, go for an easier fabric. A little bit. I mean, there are these like super soft, super stretchy, lovely knitted fabrics, but avoid them. Not good as a first project. I would perhaps more recommend like 100% cotton or 95 cotton, 5% elastan. A little bit elastan, it's fine. That will help the fabric a lot to recover, to not stretch out and grow. But a little bit more stable fabric, I think, is the best way to go. And maybe also a pattern that is a little bit more. It's more easier. It doesn't have so much details and complicated things. It's a pretty straightforward silhouette or whatever. So you want to start off easy, I think, both with the pattern and the fabric. And I don't know, what do you think would be a suitable first project? Is like t-shirt, sweatshirt, or leggings? What do you think?
I would say, great question. If I was just thinking from perspective that you just have a sewing machine and maybe an overlocker or a serger, I would say I would probably recommend that you started with quite a stable fabric, because to me, a t-shirt is like the next level, and I would say leggings too. So if I would just talk about what I would say easy, I would say sew a college sweater. I think college sweatshirt, because then you have great things working for you. Stable fabric, because you're usually using heavier cotton fabric. No hemming, because you're adding cups. So you don't need to have like a hemming stitch, for instance. If you're hemming on a sewing machine, you usually need to use a twin needle, which can also have a learning curve. And you might need a cover stitch machine, which is a completely whole investment that you do not need when you're just starting out sewing with knits. So, and the only thing you have to think about really that is kind of difficult is the neckline, but because again the fabric is quite stable, it won't grow. So if I would just say, what is the easiest thing to sew? I would say a classic college sweatshirt in heavy cotton or cotton polyester sweatshirt fabric. That's my.
I think that's a wise choice. And then you have two material that you need to combine. I mean, the sweatshirt, the sleeve, the front and the back piece are in sweatshirt fabric. And then the cuffs are usually in a rib, maybe a little bit heavier rib as well, like not these super soft ribs that are like growing just by looking at them. Maybe a little bit more stable rib that has a little bit elastan in it as well, that then holds it together. I think that's a wise choice, I would say. And you can do so much with these, and there are great patterns out there, and it's also maybe a little bit easier to get the fit nice, because it is a little bit more relaxed fit. It's not a tight t-shirt can be a little bit more fitting issue with, but the college sweatshirt that's usually pretty easy to nail. And if you have something in your wardrobe already, you can like redraft the garment that you already have onto tracing paper and use that as pattern as well. So it's I think that's a good starting point.
And I think also usually you have two different style options here with the sleeves, either raglan sleeve or satin sleeve, but I would say that both are quite easy to sew. Would you say that one is kind of easier, or?
Yeah, no, not for this type of, it's pretty much the same, I would say. It's it is not a difficult sewing technique one way or the other. So both are good option. But one with if we talk about the armhole, here is a big difference compared to woven garments, because woven garments usually sew the shoulder seam and the side seam, and then you sew on the sleeve the inside sleeve length seam, and then you sew it on top to the bodice for the woven fabric. And you usually, the sleeve head, sleeve cap is usually bigger compared to the armhole, so you have ease, small gatherings, puckerings almost, like at the top of a sleeve cap, because you need that for the movement, and it looks nice silhouette basically when you have woven fabric. But with knitted fabric is actually the opposite for a satin sleeve. Then the sleeve cap or the sleeve head is gonna be smaller compared to the armhole. Not a lot, but like maybe on a total, like in between 1 to 2 centimeters below 1 inch shorter the sleeve cap compared to the armhole. So the sleeve cap is actually holding in the armhole slightly. So this is the difference. And also the sewing order, because usually you sew for knitted fabric, then you sew the shoulder seam, and then you sew the armhole, then the side seam in one go. So here's also the order a little bit different.
Yeah.
So this is a huge difference compared to both the order of sewing and also with the negative ease instead of a plus ease.
Yeah, and we're definitely going to post some illustrations from our book Fit for Knits where you can see this in action as well, because it feels a little bit abstract when we try to explain this, but it's, as you say, it's a completely different way of sewing. And I strongly advise against trying to sew the arm and the body separately and then trying to join them, because it's going to be so much more difficult and you won't be able to get that nice even stitching. So that's a good example of how you have to like retrain your brain and do something that feels a little bit unintuitive when you compare to what you would normally do with the woven. As you say, instead of more ease at the sleeve cap, it's less ease, and you sew it on the flat rather than sewing the arm and the sleeve or the body separately. So yeah, a really good point there as well. And if you're sewing, for instance, I mean, one thing about sewing with knits as well, I mean, if you have stretchy fabric, you do get some built-in shaping, but I would probably advise, even though darts are really great for shaping on knit garments, I would definitely kind of take that as a next step and just try to keep and minimize the amount of seams that you're going to do, because once you get that feeling, it's not difficult to sew darts on knits, but it is definitely not the first step. It's just, getting the feel for the fabric, I think, is more important than go crazy with the details, and just keep it simple. I think that's probably the best way of tackling this. And if we go back to the treatment of the fabric, one question that I hear sometimes is, should you pre-wash knits before you start sewing or cutting it, or should you wash afterwards? What are the pros and cons? So what's your take on that, Malena?
I do recommend that you pre-wash it. I have usually I don't pre-wash, but it's because I don't. The samples that I sew are like for photo shoots or just for the fit toiles, basically. So then it's another thing. But now I actually have bought a couple of fabrics that I'm gonna sew, and like garments that I'm actually gonna wear, and then I am pre-washing it. Both to get, I mean, if there are any chemicals in the fabric you want to get rid of, and if the fabric is gonna shrink, it's gonna be doing that before you cut it. And also you see a little bit how it behaves. But always good to press it afterwards, so it's because then the fabric, it needs to lay flat when you cut it out, otherwise there can be some crinkles that are misbehaving there. So, but I would definitely pre-wash it.
Yeah, especially if we're using the example here that we're talking about, maybe a mostly natural fibers, cotton sweatshirt fabric, it's gonna shrink for sure. So the length will be a little bit different, I think, if you don't pre-wash it. Of course, the exception is if you're, for instance, sewing something that is 100% polyester, it's not going to shrink, so that's not a factor. But we are not talking about those more complex. You're not going to sew a bathing suit, the first thing you're going to do. But if we talk about natural fibers, they're definitely going to shrink. And as you say, also could be residues of things that you don't really want. So I sometimes I skip it. It depends on the style a little bit, but now if we're going to do it correctly, and that's what we're trying to teach you here, not do as we say, not as we do.
Exactly.
Definitely pre-wash first. I mean, to me, the only drawback is that if you're unlucky, the fabric will twist a little bit, and it's going to be a little bit more difficult when you're going to cut it. So that's, I think, to me, one of the reasons why I sometimes skip it, because I'm like, I can't be bothered trying to get this straight afterwards, because it just behaves a little bit different. But yeah, do pre-wash, especially if you're using natural fibers. As for cutting, another thing, because normally we all sewing pattern has a grain line, and the normal way that we do is that we place the pattern pieces, and then we measure the distance from the grain line to the selvage, the edge where on the mill where the loom where the fabric has been woven, and then we make sure that it's equal distance at the top of the arrow and at the bottom of the arrow, because that's the way for us to ensure that the pattern pieces are straight and aligned, and they won't twist when you sew and wear them. But even though we do put grain line on our knit sewing patterns, a grain line technically is a little bit different, right, than on woven fabrics.
Yeah, exactly, and it is how the knitted fabric is constructed, because when it is knitted, it's not knitted as a flat fabric. It's knitted in a circular machine, basically. So it goes, on one
row
on one row it can actually knit several rows at a time, so it's a very fast process, but then you have a tubular basically when it's done, and then they cut it open, and usually they cut along the grain line. They are can be pretty careful with that, but it's not always like exactly, so you need to be a little bit careful with that. So I think the easiest way to actually look at the fabric and try to see where the grain line is, like follow a wale, it's called. On a rib it's very visible, but on a single jersey it can be a little bit trickier to find, but I find usually when you fold it over and you see that it goes along a wale, then it's usually straight, because the wale and the row, they can be slightly tilting because of as I said, that it's knitted several rows are knitted in
one turn, or maybe the right word.
So it can be slightly slanting, the rows compared to the grain line. So that is a little bit tricky to find, and it's important to follow the grain line, because if you start to twist your pattern pieces, then the fabric might start to twist when you wear it, or when you wash it. The side seam might start to twist around basically. So that's why it's so important to still follow the grain line. And it might feel a little bit weird if you have tilted the pattern pieces, because it stretches a little bit differently, because usually on knitwear it has one way more stretch compared to the other, so the width is usually more stretch compared to the length. So that's why it's like super crucial to follow that. This is also the reason why I got the question once that when you, for example, cut the cuff for a neckline that you want to be stretched out when you sew it, on woven you cut a bias tape, and it is on bias, so you get a little bit of stretch in it. But you don't do that on knitwear. You still have the grain line that needs to be straight. If you would put it on the bias, because knitwear has this different stretch width and lengthwise, it's not going to stretch equally if it's cut on bias.
The whole piece is going to have different properties, exactly. So one part of the strip is going to be more stretchy, and the other one is going to feel more rigid. Yeah, so there's no extra value of doing on a bias. It's not a fancy technique.
It's wrong, to be honest. Because then when you sew it and it is stretched out, it's gonna these diagonal drag lines are gonna appear because the fabric stretches differently. It is a reason why bias tape on woven and those kind of cuffs or whatever are cutted straight on knitwear. And usually in America they don't have, or maybe they also do have a grain line, but they have stretch direction. So they have in which direction the fabric stretches the most. So here's a little bit different, more depending on where you are from, if it's a grain line or if it's stretch direction on the pattern.
Yeah, and they usually they are opposites. So, for instance, the grain line is usually vertically placed on the pattern, and the stretch is, as you say, Malena, horizontally placed. So that's usually a good indication of the stretch direction. And I put both on my pattern, both the grain line and especially when it matters. So, for instance, the cuffs and things like that, the neckband, is very important that you do this. So even if, for instance, if you're sewing a neckband, even if you have a fabric that has 4-way stretch, which meaning that it has good amount of stretch lengthwise, you still should cut it crosswise, because it just won't work the same way. There is a reason why it's done in a specific order, and I think it's very good to follow that. And as a side note as well, when it comes to cutting, I do recommend that you place the pattern pieces on the right side of the fabric, because then it's going to be easy, like you say, Malena, easier at least to find the clear vertical rib or wale, because if you're cutting from the reverse side, usually it's a completely different shape. It's loops, for instance. I mean, regardless if you're sewing jersey or sweatshirt fabric, and good luck with trying to find a clear. That's not how it works. So, I mean, generally speaking, I can understand why you want to cut it on the reverse side. Maybe you want to do some markings on the fabric, so it would be nice to not risking have it on the right side. But I unless the fabric is identical on both sides, which is rare, I don't see any case for cutting ever on the reverse side on a knit fabric. How do you feel about that?
It's always from the right side I'm cutting. And when you cut, just make sure that the fabric is flat on the table, not hanging down, being pulled out, being stretched or anything. So just be super careful with that. I prefer scissors since it's then I never mark my notches with a pen or anything. I just cut it. I also get, I think the outer corner is fine, but then the inner corner or like curved, it's so much more difficult to cut with a rotary cutter. But I know it's super fast, and look what I got!
Wow! Oh no! I am shocked. Yeah. You have to watch the video version. I am. What's happening,
I am team scissors. I will die on that hill.
What have you been drinking lately? I mean.
Yeah, late night shopping.
So should we tell the listeners and not the viewers, what are you holding in your hands now? It's not prosecco, but it's I'm hallucinating, or is it true?
It is a rotary cutter that I have in my hand. Hell has frozen over.
Oh
I am
no!
still team scissors. I am.
Okay.
I said what I said. I meant it. I will die on that hill. But depending on the project, a rotary cutter is actually pretty easy and convenient.
True that.
When you cut in tulle fabric, for example, it is so difficult to get it completely straight with the scissors. You get these small jags basically when you open the scissor again. Then it's just so much easier with a rotary cutter and a mat underneath. So yeah, since I'm working a little bit more with tulle these days, I have bought a rotary cutter. I will still cut my jersey fabric, but
yeah. You're not 100% against rotary cutter, yes?
No, it's not per se.
No.
It depends on the fabric, it depends on the project. You pivot if you are gonna have different types of projects.
Are we gonna bet now on? Are we gonna talk about this in a year again? We're not saying this, Malena, if you're listening. Maybe in a year, maybe she even try to use the rotary cutter, maybe, because again, the edges get super clean when you cut with the rotary cutter. I'm just saying, hard to get that with a pair of scissors when you're doing the lower part of the bodies. I'm all for the sizing because those are you're going to overlock and cut with the serger anyways usually. But yeah, but again, good message now if we go back to all you newbies to sewing with knits. If someone is a seasoned pro as Malena is still using a good pair of scissors and haven't done the rotary cutter mat conversion, you can definitely do the same. So don't listen to me because I am very much in love with my rotary cutter, but not even I can justify you going out and buying that just because you sew with knits. Save your money for overlocker instead.
Definitely. And it's a matter of how you like to work, and it's I do think cutting the cuffs, neckline cuff or sleeve cuff. So I mean those things. Yeah, I mean they are going to be so much easier with a rotary cutter and a ruler to get those straight lines. But otherwise, I prefer my scissors. But of course, I had to stay true to Fiskars. Not promotion, not anything. Bought it with my own money. But yeah, Fiskars is the one that I recommend.
Yeah, and we should also say Fiskars is as a Finnish brand, right?
Yes, it is.
So there is a connection here.
Oh yes, it is in my DNA.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a little side note. There are scissors and rotary cutters, especially for knitted fabrics, are very popular alternative to cutting. So
and you definitely need a good pair of scissors if you're gonna stay with a pair of scissors, because, as you say, if your scissors is a little bit blunt, you will get those jagged that you described with the tulle. I found that the same thing happens. if I'm trying to cut knits with a very like blunt pair of scissors. So again, not sponsored, but Fiskars has a great sharpener for scissor sharpeners. I think both you and I own those, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yes. So we're going to link to these products. And also, if you haven't already, I'm sure you have, invest in a good pair of scissors. Fiskars, I love Kai, the Japanese brand. I think also really good. And there are a couple of others as well. I know that are good, but yeah, do your research. You know, even if just because something is labeled fabric scissors doesn't mean it's good for. It's not proprietary. It's not guaranteed. So definitely go with the good brands.
For quality
sure.
over quantity here, definitely.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also,
speaking of utilities, the needle is also different compared to woven in a regular sewing machine. For woven fabric, you can have universal needle or the regular needle that is more sharp. A jersey needle has a rounded tip called a ballpoint needle because it's rounded. So that means since it's rounded, it doesn't cut through the fibers when you sew it. It actually like goes in between the fibers, so it doesn't create any holes, accidental holes when you sew. So that's why it's so important. If you use a regular needle, it can actually cut the fibers, and when you get a hole on jersey fabric, I mean, the wales can unravel. So we want to avoid that. So that's why always a ballpoint needle, depending a little bit on what kind of fabric you are using, either ballpoint or I think that's the same as jersey needle, but then you have stretch needle as well. I think that's more for like active wear, lycra fabric.
Like exactly.
Like a bathing suit fabric.
Yeah, and I think if you're sewing maybe a very stable sweatshirt fabric, you might do that with a universal needle because it has a slight ball point. It's just not as pronounced, so it could definitely work. But if you're gonna, as Malena said, venture into more stretchy fabrics, lighter weight knits, you're definitely gonna have to switch to a ballpoint needle or a stretch needle, and also. Just like with regular needles, there are different sizes. So, for instance, if you're sewing a lightweight knit, go for a smaller size. But for instance, if you're following this example and sewing a sweatshirt, especially when you're sewing the cuffs and there are lots of layers, you're definitely going to have to have a bigger needle. So just because it's knit doesn't mean you have to use a small size. Do the kind of the size that is required, and that can be different depending on what type of seam you're sewing as well, because sometimes you need to penetrate towards lots of layers of heavy knit fabrics. Go for a bigger needle. I mean, you can use a 90 needles in some cases if the fabrics and the layers are too heavy for a smaller needle.
And on overlockers, the needle that's used there is usually universal, so that's usually fine for knitwear as well, since it is slightly rounded. Not as rounded as a proper ballpoint needle, but it's still good enough in most cases, I would say. And also this helps having the right needle, both size and tip. It's gonna also help prevent skipped stitches, because that could be a little bit of a tricky thing when it comes to knitwear. And the seams then. We can't do straight seams here.
No, unfortunately not. I've actually tried. I saw it was decades ago, but I saw like a regular cotton jersey, no lycra t-shirt, but it had a yoke, and the yoke was going to be top stitched. So I thought maybe because it's a stable knit, it doesn't stretch too much, I decided to stitch across using a regular straight stitch, but guess what happened?
Yeah, the problem when you have stretchy fabric, but the seam is stiff, it is gonna break, or it might break, or it might just feel uncomfortable when you wear it, that is like this tiny stitch that is like holding it in. So yeah, the seam has to be stretchy. You can, I mean, there are these, I haven't used it yet, tried it, the thread
Stretch
that is
thread.
actually stretchy. That would sound really amazing, I think, especially for top stitchings. I wouldn't do it for side seams. I would still do the overlocker or a stretch stitch on the home sewing machine, just because they are more durable, I would say then.
Yeah, and it's also a little bit more dense, I would, because I've been using the stretch thread for sewing machines, and I will say now that's like next level, but it's great for sewing darts, because then you can use a straight stitch. You don't have to use a zigzag stitch or an overlock stitch, and you still get enough stretch so that the seam doesn't break, which I thought was really awesome. So I definitely am a big fan. But it's also more expensive, so I wouldn't waste it on sewing entire garments. I think for specific details, I'd say, as you say, top stitching, any type of seams that you need to shaping seams, I would definitely think about it. And of course, if you using a straight stitch for some reason, you definitely need to shorten the stitch length as well, because that at least gives it a little bit more elasticity. You're probably not enough, but it depends, of course, on the project and the fabric that you're using. But yeah, try to avoid it. It's much better if you have to top stitch something. I would highly recommend. I would rather do a narrow zigzag stitch, so it's like a very low triangle formation. If you use the same color as the fabric, you can't really tell. So don't obsess about that.
Some seams that almost look completely straight. I think, is it called bolt seam? It's like slightly up and down, like a lightning.
Yeah, so there are two different stitches. Yeah, exactly. The bolt stitch is similar to the zigzag stitch, but as you say, it's a little bit more dense and a little bit shaped. So it's like a lightning flash like that. And there's also, on most sewing machine, they have a three-step straight stitch, so it sews back and forth. So it looks like a straight stitch, but it's not. It's super durable, but it also has some built-in stretch because of the sewing back and forth. Unfortunately, it's the most horrible stitch to rip ever.
I was going to say, that sounds like a nightmare.
Step straight stitch. So again, just because your sewing machine has that option, and it probably has, and you'll be like, oh no, great, straight stitch. I'm doing that because sometimes it's also labeled as a straight stitch in your sewing machine manual. Do a sample, get familiar with it, and realize that it's probably not the best choice, especially if the fabric is not stable and is a little bit delicate. Because a lot of knit fabrics are delicate, and you don't want to rip anything. So make sure that if you're doing something, it's going to be easy to rip.
It sounds time-consuming as well, going back and forth like that.
Yeah, yeah.
And
you
it
can
might
watch
stretch
the whole
out
movie.
the fabric as well while you sew it.
Yeah,
so
exactly. It goes back and forth. So it's not for stretchy knit fabrics. I would definitely use it for, say, stitching down a sweatshirt fabric if it's not too stretchy crosswise, or for a vertical detail, but no.
Yeah, but do test on the specific fabric that you have on scrap fabrics. Do it in the same amount of layers that you will be sewing, so maybe both along the grain line and along the stretch width, the direction, so you really get like a proper, and just pull the fabric and see, is the seam, is it too stiff, is it working, is it breaking, is it not? Just try it out, try different seams and see. And an overlocker is, of course, usually it's just go with it. It's that seam has a stretch in it, so that's a perfect for knitted fabric.
100%. If you're not having an overlocker and you get bitten by the sewing with knits, stretchy knit fabrics bug, I think overlocker is definitely something that could be worthwhile saving up to. And the more basic models aren't that expensive, so I think it can be worthwhile investment. And as we are talking about in another episode where we talk about overlocker, you can actually use it for a lot of woven fabrics as well. So it's a good investment, I would say. If that is an investment that you are able to do, I would definitely recommend it. But if you only have a sewing machine and you want to sew the side seams, then you have a couple of different options. Again, if you're using a stable fabric like the sweatshirt fabric, you can get away with either using like a narrow zigzag stitch, especially because you're sewing a lot of seams lengthwise, like the side seams, and they are not as under that much stress, and the fabric doesn't stretch as much lengthwise otherwise, because it's not a sweatshirt fabric is, unless it's lycra, it's not a 4-way stretch, it's more like a 2-way stretch, meaning it stretches crosswise mostly. Then you can use a regular narrow zigzag stitch. You can also check if your sewing machine has, Malena used the lightning bolt stitch, also good option. And usually a sewing machine also have a overlock stitch that is about 5 to 6 millimeters, 1/4 of an inch. And that brings us to seam allowance, because you do need, if you're using a sewing machine, an overlock stitch, you have to make sure that the seam allowance is, because it overcasts the edges, you have to trim the seam allowance to make it just as wide as the overlock stitch. But if you have a serger, then the knife will cut away the extra surplus fabric, trimming it down to the width that you've set your overlocker to. So again, that's why an overlock is so nice to have if you compare it to a sewing machine. I mean, it is. I would not part with my overlocker, but...
But if you sew a side seam with a regular home sewing machine, do you then overcast the edges as well with a zigzag, or do you just leave them raw?
You don't. They all depend on the fabric again, because you have to do some kind of. If you're using a stretchy fabric, you need to overcast. So the good way of doing it, if you're talking more stretchy fabric, you do first a narrow zigzag as to join the side seam, and then you do a second row of a wider zigzag stitch to overcast it, and then you get the benefit of durability. And as we all know, especially jersey fabric, they like to curl those edges. They curl. They almost like they have an curling iron like near to them. When you don't see it, they bring out the curling iron and curl the edges. So you definitely want something to flatten those edges and prevent them from curling, because that's not a nice feeling. So even if you have to do, I would say, some type of second row if you just have a regular sewing machine. At least that's how I think.
This is so typical for single jersey, because they are not the same on the front side and the back side, the right or wrong side. They are different. So that is, the edges are going to behave differently. And the funny thing is they are curling in different directions as well. Like along the grain line, it's going to curl in one way, and along the width edge, then it's going to curl the other way, like one towards the outside, one towards the inside. So yeah, it doesn't matter which edge you are working on, it's still going to curl. So annoying. Here, a little bit depending on the fabric, if it's going to curl a lot or not. But then you have fabrics like sweatshirts. They don't curl that much. It's a little bit more stable. Yeah. And interlock ribs, they are the same on the wrong and right side of the fabric, so they don't curl at all. So it's usually these pretty soft single jersey fabrics. They are the ones that are curling the most. And I mean, there are tips and tricks on how to handle it, but it is tricky to like avoid. It's the character of the fabric. It doesn't mean it's a bad quality or anything. It's just the way it is constructed. Then they just are gonna react in that way. Unfortunately.
Yeah, and that's also why it's usually a little bit nicer again to have the overlock, because then you can just have the knife cut away the curl, and so you get that nice flat joint seam. And that's usually the because we didn't really mention it, because we have to remember now, keep it basic, because we remember we didn't talk about the fact that you don't press the seam allowance apart when you're sewing, unless you're maybe sewing the neckband, then you might do that to keep reduce the bulk. But on side seams and sleeve seams, you don't press the seam allowance apart. You join both layers together with some type of overlocking situation. So that means that you press the seams in a direction rather than pressing them apart. So I guess that's also a different thing that might, because that's like, you don't really do that when you see sewing instruction for woven fabrics. It's usually the step is first you overcast the edges to keep them from fraying, and then you join the seams together, which is you don't really do that when you're sewing when it's ever.
No.
Unless it's very specific fabric, I guess.
Yeah, no, you basically overcast them at the same time. Usually, since the overlocker is it is the best machine for working with knitted fabric. You can of course a home sewing machine as well, but you do it in one go basically then if you are using an overlocker. And I recently Just Patterns actually made a really so interesting Instagram post about overlockers or the seam, that it has a right side and a wrong side. So we will definitely share that post as well, because it is I knew it, but it's never talked about, and which seam, like the overlocker seam is more flat and smooth on the top, and and underneath it is a little bit more rougher.
Yeah, because it has threads that wraps around, so it creates a different type of shape.
Yeah.
It gets a little bit bulkier. It's relative, but as you say, it's a little bit more coarse because you have that thread wrapping around the
and this might be like the next level when you sew knitwear, but you always want to, and that kind of comes intuitively when you have sewed a lot, but you want to have that smoother edge towards your body. It's also a little bit how the fabric naturally usually folds. But it was just like I had thought about that a lot, but now she is the only one who has written about it. So it was
again such a good way, because again, like going back to the basic, just like we're trying to do in this episode, that we often skip about those things. And I would definitely say that it's nothing you have to fret about, because because I like to sew in the same direction, for instance, it's gonna be one side sometimes. And it's not a big thing, but for instance, if I'm overcasting woven, I'm very particular about that, to make sure that when I press the seam allowance open, for instance, when I'm sewing jeans, then I definitely make sure that I have the right side facing the body, which means that it's going to be on the inside or the reverse side of the fabric. So yeah, it's definitely something I think about, but I wouldn't like obsessed, but because I'm so OCD when I'm so, if I had done like a woven project and if I pressed the seam allowance apart and one was with the reverse side, and I would like,
you're gonna see it's gonna visually look a little bit
it's
different.
Gonna bother me so much. I mean, I'm insane, sorry, but
no, but this is also a
like
thing that are a little bit different with knitwear as well, because I also think about, as you said, the direction of which you sew, because the fabric is going to be a little bit stretched out when you sew it. So I also try to always sew in the same direction. So if, for example, if you sew, when you attach the sleeve to the armhole, I try to always sew it from the back towards the front, for example, or the opposite. And when I sew the side seam, from the top towards the bottom on both sides. If the fabric is going to stretch a little bit, it is going to be more symmetrical, because it can shift a little bit, the fabric, and could be start to twist a little bit. So you kind of avoid it a little bit if you sew in the same direction. But but it's fascinating when people are like pinpointing. It's like, nobody has talked about that, but you notice it when you work with it.
So I've actually been thinking about this. I mean, what is the right side? And I looked into ready-to-wear and trying to figure it out. And sometimes ready-to-wear overlock stitching is a little bit different than your home serger overlocker. So it's a little bit tricky to figure out. And you can see it sometimes on the manuals, but they hardly ever specify it either. So it's definitely love that kind of nerdy stuff. I mean, that's what we live for, right? I mean, that's also what this podcast is a lot about, you know.
Yeah.
Go into
and
the
usually
details.
it goes pretty natural, so to say. I mean, for example, if you sew on a rib attachment to the neckline, I always want to have the rib attachment on top of the neckline, and then it comes naturally. The right side of the overlock seam is going to press toward, like, it just happens naturally then, so you don't really need to think about it. But it was just like, okay, nerdy thing about a very specific
everyone
topic.
is now pausing the podcast, or if you have it in your headphones, running to your wardrobe if you're at home, or just starting to pick up your clothes that you're wearing and check what the seam is like. And we're definitely going to tag Just Patterns for sure also.
Of course.
So yeah, great topic there. Well, now I've kind of lost track.
Well, one thing we mentioned a little bit also with the shoulder. On woven, you don't need to add any reinforcement to the shoulder. But on knitwear, you do, because it's a lot of stress on this little seam that is going to be stretched out, especially when you wear it. You have maybe heavy sleeves even that are stretching it out. So you need some reinforcement to the shoulder to avoid it from growing. And here, I mean, we have talked about this in several different episodes, and you have great tutorials on this
and
one.
We also have it in our book Fit for Knits. We talk about the different materials you can use, and we're definitely going to link up, of course, to some of the tutorials as well.
Yeah.
But yeah,
do you know what a funny thing, like I have always said that every single garment, knitted garment, has it. I have not seen a single garment that doesn't have it. Doesn't matter if it's low quality, high quality, brand, whatever, like there's always going to be some reinforcement. And it has been true upon yesterday. I found the first t-shirt that didn't have reinforcement on the shoulder. It was a very like soft fabric, and it didn't have a 4-thread overlock either. I think it had a 3-thread, and it was from Hugo Boss.
Wow!
Yeah, it wasn't a cheap brand, so to say. It was, yeah.
No, I would not say
no,
it's probably
I was a little
quite
bit
opposite.
Okay, what? I mean, I guess
what
it
are we missing out here?
Yeah, I'm gonna post a picture on it, but high-end brand didn't have reinforcement in their shoulder. First time I have ever seen that.
It sounds like a considered choice, I guess.
Yeah, since it was so soft fabric, like it really looked like they have adapted the seam according to the fabric as well. But
Exactly.
I would not have skipped the reinforcement. But maybe they have done some tests. Who knows? Yeah,
because I have actually encountered a few knit tops in ready to wear that hasn't had the reinforcement, and I will say that the shoulder has been growing a little bit, but those were also styles that were a little bit more loose fitting and oversized. And my guess is, as you say, they probably adapted the pattern a little bit to account for the fact that it might stretch out a little bit. And maybe they also experiment with the settings. For instance, if they increase the differential feed a little bit, that will also pull together the fabric when you're stitching. So that could also maybe affect the end result. So it seems like I'm totally open for this. And I also, the drawback with the reinforcement is the fact that it adds some bulk. And if you're using, say, a very soft, transparent t-shirt, because yes, I know I have one as well, because it's I don't think it's very common anymore, but there was a fabric, it was almost called like a knit fabric, it was called burnout fabric. Do you remember that? It was so thin. It was almost transparent, and it was usually, mine is like grey marl fabric, but it's very lightweight, so you could almost see through if you're wearing a bra, for instance. And that also did not have a stabilizer in the shoulder, so, and I guess that's, again, but it's also a loose-fitting soft top that wasn't supposed to have any shape.
Yeah, I mean, it's more if it's heavier fabric pulling the shoulders down, and when you move, like, you don't want the seam to crack or to grow or anything. But it's it was a surprise that they didn't have it on one of their t-shirts.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
But start with stabilizing the shoulder, and now when we say the shoulder seams, we're of course talking about set-in shoulders. If you're doing a raglan, you usually don't have to stabilize the shoulder seams. It's a little bit different. So that's the most important thing to remember. And we're definitely going to link up to some tutorials there, because I think that's probably an easy beginner mistake. And also, when you're stabilizing, you definitely don't want to have, if the fabric is a little bit soft, you don't want to have like a super non-stretchy strip of fabric.
Oh, that's the worst. Oh, I hate, especially with like heavy knitwear. In in the industry, and then they have like a woven tape almost, and it just looks like it becomes like a sharp V on the shoulder then, because the shoulder has no stretch at all. It's like, no, it still has to stretch a little bit. Like, it can't be. Oh, I hate that.
Yeah.
Ooh,
I hate that too. Yes, and and as you could actually get those. So don't do that mistake, because sometimes you might see a product that's called shoulder stabilizing strip, and those are usually, as Malena says, a narrow, rigid woven band with zero stretch. So unless you're sewing a very stable knit garment, definitely avoid those. So that's a really good point as well. And now, if you're not sewing a sweatshirt and you actually want to hem your garment, then you have a few options as well, because as we mentioned previously, it's a lot of stretch crosswise, so no straight stitching, unfortunately. So you have a few options, I guess, if you have a sewing machine. What would be the first thing you'd say that you might try if you want to hem?
The easiest, again, if you sew a sweatshirt, very beginner friendly, adding a cuff is actually one of the easiest way to go, and you can do that in the, if you not have a sweater, just a t-shirt, and you can do it in the same material as well, because hemming a neckline is the tricky part on t-shirts.
Or not neckline, the hemming, hemming the neckline, right, exactly. I was sorry,
hemming and the neckline, those
neckline,
are like the
hemming the neckline. I was like, that was a very advanced technique. I'm like, okay, 100% agree with you.
Because you're sewing in the direction when the fabric wants to stretch out the most, so you don't want to have a wavy seam, but you have to have stretch in the seam, because otherwise it's gonna crack when you pull it, or when you wear it, it's gonna feel uncomfortable. So a twin needle or a cover, if you have a cover stitch, then you can sew with a cover lock there to get like that really professional finish. You can just zigzag the fold up and sew with a zigzag seam as well. So there are different options here, but it is cuffs are the easiest to start out with.
Yes, I definitely feel like do a sweatshirt, people, if you're new to it. I mean, I guess that not everyone wants to do that, I guess, but I'm like, so many things speaks to doing that first, and especially when you're dealing with very soft knit fabrics, if that's where you want to go, you definitely need to do your research when it comes to hemming, and we have done separate episodes about just hemming knits that I definitely recommend that you go back and listen to. And of course, I've done lots of YouTube tutorials as well, where I show how to master both cover stitch hemming and twin needle hemming. So we will definitely link up to those as well, because that's we can do a good new episodes about that over and over again, because that's so don't be, how shall I say this? I want to be encouragement, because you may everything is not nice, and then you start hemming and it doesn't turn out the way the hem stretches out, it gets wavy, it's hard to get even. Don't worry, we have all been there, and just want to say hemming is hard when it comes to knits. So as Malena says, start with the cuff, get familiar with the fabric, do your research, do samples, practice. I think especially mindful practice, where you like try a setting, switch a little bit, test something else, increase the stitch length, how you handle the fabric, all those things. Because just like with everything else, sewing with knits is a lot of like intuitive. Your motor skills would kind of gradually more and more understand how to deal with different type of fabrics. That's why the more you sew, the better you get. So it's the same with knit fabric. So just because you have one or two, in quotation mark, failed projects maybe before this, don't worry, you will get better with time. When you start to understand how to deal with the knit fabric, it's going to be a really rewarding way. And it's also, the good thing about knit, it's actually quite fast as well. You don't have to spend like days and days and weekends trying to finishing. I mean, if you can definitely whip up a college sweatshirt quite easily and luckily quite fast as well. So I think there are lots of cases, good cases for actually starting to sew with knits. Especially when you want those quick win projects, I think knits is a wonderful way. Plus, to be honest, isn't that what most of us is wearing for a lot of the time these days anyway? I mean, just look at you and I, Malena, what are we wearing? We're wearing t-shirts and I'm wearing a cardigan, so yeah. Also my pants are also made with knit fabrics. They're the Vida pants, sewing pattern that I have, so I'm like knit from top to toe today, and I'm sure a lot of you also love wearing knits because it's a great way of having a modern wardrobe, I think, with also you don't have to iron it. It's just great. I think we could talk definitely a whole more episode about that, and I'm sure we will do more episodes like this in the future. And of course, if you have any questions or specific topics regarding this that we should address in the future episode, you can definitely get in touch. You can email us at stitchingtalespod@gmail.com, or you can comment on our YouTube channel, Stitching Tales Pod, or our Instagram account, Stitching Tales Pod. We are everywhere. Almost. Not TikTok, not yet, but we'll see. I am.
Yeah, and I mean, this is our favorite topic, sewing with knitted fabrics. I mean, this is our right up our alley. If you have any questions, we would love to do future episodes, and we have done so many episodes about this already. So we have a great library to go back and listen to if you want to know anything specific about this. What are your beginner questions? We would love to know what you are wondering on and what you find difficult, so we can talk more about it.
100%. So thank you so much for listening. I hope you found this episode useful, and also perhaps a good reminder if you actually are a little bit more experienced with sewing minutes. I thought it was good. I realized a few things myself actually talking just about this. Because we tend to forget the basics sometimes. Yeah. Anyways, thank you so much for listening. I am Johanna Lundström.
And I am Malena and Hjerpe. Bye bye.
Bye bye.